Repercussions on the state. The conjunction of state and technique is not a neutral fact. For many, it is not surprising and implies nothing but a growth of state power. They ask whether, after all, it is not a good thing that the state perform its functions as well as possible and be well equipped to this end. We have indeed known a state which had only a laughable police force, powerless and incapable of checking criminals. It is a good thing for technical progress in this sphere to collate all other techniques, thus enabling the state to perform its role of arresting crime. These techniques, when utilized by the state, enable it to restore order, to guarantee certain liberties, and even perhaps to master its political destiny. This is how current opinion interprets the conjunction of technique and the state. I believe that such attitudes are superficial and inaccurate. Technique, in its present state of development, is no longer merely a passive instrument under state control, as it was under the control of certain individuals. The question now is what we see when we examine contemporary facts instead of antiquated principles. Evolution. The first consequence of the conjunction of state and technique is the progressive transformation of the old techniques of the state after they have come in contact with the new techniques, formerly private but now becoming public. When a comparison is made between private and public techniques, it is noted that private techniques are incomparably more efficient. I have already indicated certain reasons for this. To the extent that techniques remain private, they lie outside the framework of the state. When they come under state control, however, the question inevitably arises why these techniques should not be incorporated into the traditional framework of the state. But private techniques seem to have been created to answer different requirements. They have different dimensions, and this poses a problem. Private methods are intimately connected with their objectives, and these objectives are of human dimensions. Consequently, they are not adaptable to the much more extended needs of the state. This incompatibility ceases to be true, however, as private business begins to assume dimensions equal to and sometimes greater than those of the state. It is clear that enterprises such as Cicerone or Bata are of such dimensions that their administrations are comparable to the administration of the state. Standard Oil has international interests of such magnitude that its international policy is like that of a state. The financial power of the insurance trust is such that a parallel can be drawn between its financial system and that of the state. It appears that, starting with a certain critical mass, sociological and technical laws are identical for private and public enterprises. We may exclude from the technical framework states such as Luxembourg and San Marino, and we may soon be forced to exclude nations which do not prepare themselves quickly enough to face up to technical demands such as Belgium, Holland, and Denmark. These three have already been obliged to combine in order to meet modern technical problems. European nations in general are being compelled to renounce political sovereignty and form associations designed to realize certain far-reaching technical operations, as, for example, research projects in atomic energy, the exploitation of the Sahara, the launching of an artificial satellite. Conversely, we must include in the technical framework the great private enterprises whose technical principles are identical with those of the state. Indeed, it may be said that in general that the state lags behind the great corporations in this respect, and that it is compelled to modify and rationalize its administrative, judicial, and financial systems, on the model of the great commercial and industrial enterprises. This is the point that Harant I can't pronounce that name, makes in his book about the government of great organizations. He shows in particular that all administrations, civil or military, state or industrial, must rest on identical principles of technical organization if they would be efficient. If these principles are not followed, the administration is condemned to being overtaken and passed by private enterprise. In this respect, France is alarmingly backward, because our administrative and financial system was the world's best a century ago. We carefully persist in maintaining it, whereas the plain truth is that certain techniques would guarantee much better results. Even our newly created administrations, such as Social Security, refuse to be guided by well-known technical rules. This is not the case in the so-called progressive countries, in which the administrative and financial systems are aligned very rapidly, too rapidly perhaps, when the social order is not on the same plane as the technical organization. So this is not the case in so-called progressive countries, in which the administrative and financial systems are aligned very rapidly with industrial and commercial techniques. This new organization of administration results in part from the creation of a technique of administration, and in part from the introduction of the machine into all organizations. The two are related, not only because mechanization entails, as I have already pointed out, a reorganization of administrative units, but also because mechanization solves the major problem of administration, the problem of paperwork. All organizations are founded on paperwork, and when paperwork transcends human capacities by virtue of sheer quantity and complexity, the problem of what to do about it arises. The machine is the solution. To get some idea of the magnitude of this mechanization, let us consider the two overall categories of office machines, accounting and statistical. The first category is divided into 7 major types and their subdivisions. The second is divided into 4 types and 14 species. The operations affected by these machines involve a modification of the administrative structure. Administrative tasks must comply with mechanical requirements. Mass says that the operations cannot be carried out except by breaking them down into homogeneous tasks and functions so that they can be committed to mechanical organs. What does homogeneous mean again? Think of the whole. Of the same or similar kind of nature. Oh. Uniform structure or composition. So it's like, okay, so similar. Mass says that the operations cannot be carried out except by breaking them down into homogeneous tasks, uniform tasks, and functions so that they can be committed into mechanical organs. Okay, I see what he's saying. The operations may be grouped by cycles as a function of the end sought, or they may be brought together into a single task, combining all operations of the same technical nature. This last is so-called functional grouping, which results in administration divided into performance function, arrangement function, interpretation function, and control function. It is easily seen how far removed all this is from the traditional type of office and from the customary division of administrative tasks. What is true in administration is also true in finances. The traditional principles of public accounting, such as the separation of the functions of comptroller and accountant, the control of monies paid out, etc., have clearly been affected. A tremendous leap was necessary for the Corps des Comptes. I can't pronounce the French words. 20 years in arrears with its inspection of finances to deliver in 1948 the results for 1944 and 1945. The guiding principle of finance today is that security is sacrificed to speed. Finance no longer represents, as it did in the 19th century, the rule, the criterion, and the check. It has become the instrument of an efficient general policy. It must never act as an obstacle to a decision which is technically valid. Its traditional role as a check and constraint has been rendered questionable through the adoption of new techniques in imitation of private enterprise. The financial regime of a modern state is highly reminiscent of commercial affairs. The rules of accounting are modified by the application of business machines, for example, punched card machines. Here, machine intervention directly voids an older administrative technique. A certain flexibility is necessary, but is rarely found in state structures, which are, for various reasons, rigid. Nothing less than revolution brings about the adaptation of political regimes to the technical improvements which have become mandatory as a result of private enterprise. This is only a corollary of what I have been saying, namely, that political motivations do not dominate technical phenomena, but rather the reverse. The state is usually unable for doctrinal reasons to revolutionize the techniques of public finance. But when technical progress makes this revolution mandatory, the state is obliged to capitulate. This is clear enough with respect to army, police, administration, and finance, but it is perhaps less clear with respect to law. Here is one of the major problems contemporary jurists ought to be considering, but all too often they waste their time in textual subtleties. The judicial regime is simply not adapted to technical civilization, and this is one of the causes of its inefficiency and of even greater contempt felt toward it. Law is conceived as a function of a traditional society. It has not registered the essential transformation of the times. Its content is exactly what it was 3 centuries ago. It has experienced only a few fragmentary transformations, such as the corporation. No other attempts at modernization have been made, nor have form and methods varied any more than content. Judicial techniques has been little affected by techniques that surround us today. Had it been, it might have gained much in speed and flexibility. Faced with this importance of the law, society passes to the opposite extreme and burdens administration with everything that is the product of the times in the judicial sphere. Administration, because it is better adapted from the technical point of view, continually enlarges its sphere at the expense of the judicial, which remains centered on vanishing problems such as codicils, community revisions, and the like. These last, and all similar problems that are the exclusive concern of our law, are problems that relate to an individualistic society of private property, political stability, and judicial subtlety. Law is radically vitiated by its backwardness. We ought to be concerned not only with making laws, but with rediscovering judicial principles that might possibly put into some kind of order the constructions made necessary by modern technique. All the traditional legal principles are collapsing. For example, the principle of the non-retroactivity of laws, or that of the personal de delites et des peines. This is not due to the particular evil of our society, but simply to the fact that the law, insofar as it is a system, is not adapted to absorb necessary innovations. This is the resistance to social upheaval of a long-tested and traditional technique, and in the judicial sphere, unlike the others, there is no fund of private experiment to render it more efficient. As I have pointed out, private experiment remains the principal source of the advance of technique, even when technique has passed into the hands of the state. Another striking example of this is found in pedagogy. Educational method was stabilized after the state nationalized education and adopted the Jesuits' technique. But the pedagogic movement dating from the turn of the century is at present rendering the whole edifice questionable. The older framework was coherent, but the combined technical discoveries of psychologists, physicians, and educators have given birth to a new system which is progressively penetrating the educational milieu. The state is moving in the direction of these discoveries. It has created the so-called new classes, which do not yet correspond exactly to the principles of modern pedagogy, but which do represent the first step of integration into the body of the state of a method worked out by private persons. Once again, we see the traditional techniques of the state being modified by the influence of private techniques, subject to a certain lag and to difficulties that result from the enormity of the operations which concern not a few individuals, but millions. You ran here.
Born without sin, Mary, teaching in the early church. Please, one piece of evidence. That's it. That's all I require.
Okay.
Because all of your theology, listen to me, all of your theology has to tie back to the apostles. All of it. So tell me, where during the first early church do they mention praying to Mary? Mary's the co-mediatrix. Mary is the mother of God. Mary is perpetual virgin. Mary is born without sin. Give me any of that from the early church. You can't do it.
I don't need to do it.
Yes, you do. Your own catechism says all of your theology stems from the apostles.
Correct.
So you have to give me evidence. Well,
yes,
there is.
And the evidence is that the church believes it.
Oh my God. The church, the early church, there's no evidence that they practice these ideas at all.
There is evidence that Jesus was gay, though.
Oh,
there's evidence that Jesus was gay. I'm just saying.
So, let me ask you. Let me ask you, because you're a sola scripturist, I'm guessing. Did Christ say? Did Christ promise that the church would persist until his return?
Yes, it does say that the church will persist until he comes. Yes.
Okay, and what is the principal identity of the church? Like, how do you identify the church from
in the winter? So if you look at what's that? What's near Finland? What's that Russian city? It's not Leningrad. It's Stalingrad. I don't fucking remember. I mean, that freezes up.
Yeah. What did I miss, man? I've been gone for like a week. I haven't really Yeah, what's up with you?
I'll tell you later in private.
Yeah.
Take a look at the modern map, and you'll see in between Poland and one of the southern, is it Latvia? I don't remember. I don't remember. Russia exists right next to Poland, but Russia proper is far away. Why? Was it merely because they had military bases there? Or is it because that's a warm weather port? So all of the countries in between that port and Russia, you're going to have a highway there. Now the European Union and NATO can just choose